Hey, welcome back to Dear Baseball Gods. This is Dan Blewett, and we have a great guest this week. Ty Blancmeyer is joining us on the show. He is a current Milwaukee Brewers scout. This is his second year in scouting. And Ty is a St. John's University Red Storm alumni. And one of the interesting things that we'll get into today is that he actually played for his father, who has been the coach at St. John's for over 2 decades. Ty also played pro baseball. He was drafted by the Reds in the 36th round. And so we'll get into his story, which is unique. He grew up in a clubhouse, being a little kid, following his dad around St. John's baseball. Obviously, that had a tremendous impact on his baseball IQ and his education there. Then he was obviously a good Division I player and then went on to play pro baseball as well and is now in the scouting realm. So stick around. We're going to jump right into the interview with Ty Blancmeyer. Hey, Ty, thanks for coming on the show. How's everything out there in Jersey?
Hey, Dan. Thanks for having me. Trying to stay warm up here, but going well.
Are you guys in the polar vortex like we are?
Yeah, it's rather cold, and I don't think it's going to get much better here in the next couple of days. So, northeast winters, getting ready for baseball season.
Yeah, I always tend to talk or to start some of these podcasts off just talking about the weather and the geography, but today is actually a unique day. It's negative. Let me check. Let me verify. I think it's negative 19 outside. Nope, negative 21 outside right now. Outside my window. So it's like literally death, like 4 feet to the left of me if I were to jump out of my window. So our mutual acquaintance, Zach Clark, we got connected with you down the scouting trail. So you are currently in your second year at the Brewers, right?
Correct.
So at this point, your baseball IQ, from what I've heard, is already immense, especially for your age. But B, you've been now a college player. You grew up with your dad, who's a somewhat famous college coach at St. John's, and then you were a pro player, and now you're a scout. So you've kind of been all over.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Like, I think of the last 6 years for me of where I've been, and it's like a lot of different perspectives and roles, and it's like so easy to be like, not too long ago I was across the fence playing, or not too long ago I was doing this, and it definitely makes you, thankful and realize how quickly time flies, and like really be able to have to appreciate that kind of stuff, because it does go by fast. Watching some of these college games, watching St. John's play, you're like, damn, I played with these kids as, freshman and sophomore, and now I'm like scouting them. It's actually it's a unique feeling, to say the least.
Yeah, I can imagine. So tell me what it was like, because, you hear about some of these major leaguers. Like I remember Ken Griffey Jr., like seeing him like with his little kid in tow, his son, on the field. I think it's a really unique, it's got to be such an interesting experience for you to grow up in a clubhouse, right? So your dad's been the St. John's head coach for, is this his 25th year coming up?
Yeah, I believe so. 25th year, I want to say. No, 24th. And he's 2 wins away from 800. So, this year he should get it relatively quick unless they start slow. But yeah, so 24th year, sorry.
So pretty much your whole life, you were, I'm sure, puttering around with like your little plastic bat, and then you're, I guess whatever is after that, I guess probably right to aluminum. But what was it like growing up, as part of the St. John's culture from the beginning, and then obviously you went on to play there as a player as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was so cool, and I thought I was the coolest kid ever, being able to go, on weekends to go be a bat boy on St. John's baseball team and go from place to place on the weekends with my dad. And it's all I knew growing up. It was such a special thing for me to be able to be on the field during batting practice, to be causing havoc on the bus, to really, the most important thing is just to be with your dad growing up. So I think that's why me and my father have a special relationship, is not only were we working on baseball, we were doing this, but, every step of the way, and, St. John's on the road, and, they would take me on a trip, and, I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and like I said, I thought it was the coolest, fourth grader around, because I could go hang out with the St. John's baseball team and, learn different things, good and bad, but learned things from being around the game. So the game really raised me, and St. John's baseball really raised me in a sort of way that I'm truly thankful for.
So it's one of those things where, when there's kids in the clubhouse that some guys gravitate to them, like some players want to go like teach them everything and be best buddies. Other guys, kind of keep to themselves. Were there any guys that maybe have gone on to do big things that, you really formed a connection with when you were a kid? Any former players?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton. I mean, I think I still keep in touch with a lot of them, but the one that sticks out because I was there right as I was coming up and wanting to be a ball player was, Joe Panik. I mean, that's a guy that everybody knows, but the thing about Joe Panik was he was an infielder, I was an infielder, and when he was a freshman, I was a sophomore in high school, I want to say, or no, so around that age. I was in high school when he was in college, right? And I would always go and just hit with him and be around him. And so to fast forward that to go into college, and I was now in college, and now he was already in the big leagues. He would come back after he won the World Series, and I'd be able to hit with him, and we had a good relationship, and it was cool. Like, that's the kind of resource I had from being able to go up at St. John's. That was special. And then there's a lot of guys that, that had, that still work in the game. That I think the cool thing about St. John's is a lot of the baseball tradition is so rich that even if they're not big league baseball players, these guys want to be coaches. These guys want to, help, grow the game. So another guy that I really grew close to was Scott Brown. He never played at St. John's, but he coached at St. John's for years. And me and him have a good relationship. Scott Brown is now the pitching coach at Vanderbilt. So just like, two examples of guys that, have a lot of experience in the game, and, they're, like our relationships have, really excelled and grown throughout the years. And I'm happy I can, like, in scouting, if I have a question about a kid or a circumstance, and I could throw stuff off them, and they've been great resources. The both of them really have been for me.
Yeah. So let's go back to Joe a little bit, because I'm curious. Did you see different quality? So, I think with big leaguers, they always have something different about them, right? Maybe they're like way more athletic than other people. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a physical talent, but a lot of times it's their demeanor, it's their approach to the game and to life and their process. Did you, because you knew him well before, he made it to the majors. Mm-hmm. Did you have like an inkling? Did you like see different qualities in him?
The quality I saw was his consistency. Like, even though I was rather young, like his tool set, I wouldn't say like blared out at you on the paper per se, but I mean, he always put the bat to the ball. He was always in the right place at the right time. He was very steady, very simple in everything he did, which allowed him to be more consistent. So, I mean, he's the type of guy you're at the game and, 2-3 innings go by and you're like, I mean, he might not stick out at that level necessarily, but then all of a sudden in like the 7th, 8th inning, you look at the scoreboard, he has 2 or 3 hits, and then he's made 2 or 3 big plays to help your team win the game. The best way to put it is during the course of the game, Joe Panik did something to help the team win, and that was his tool. It's not, I would say it's the hit tool and he could defend, but I mean, that's the thing he did that separated him from everybody else. So Joe was a winner.
And I think that's a quality that you can probably speak to on now that you're scouting amateurs on an everyday basis. It seems like fewer kids maybe have that trait. Would you agree or disagree?
I would agree 100%. I mean, it's still there. You still see that guy who has it, and you really have to appreciate it. But I think it all derives from the landscape of amateur baseball now. And I think everybody's playing more, practicing less. We play all year round, so games mean less. It's just it's just simple math. These kids now play probably 170 games throughout the year, something crazy like that. I'm guesstimating, but the fact is, if you're playing that many games as a young kid, the games have to mean less. Like it's just you got these baseball tournaments that they're trying to make their money, which I get, and get the kids their exposure, which they're doing right by the kids, but we're not necessarily teaching kids as a community how to win, what it takes to win. We're just giving them mass exposure, and this exposure, the atmosphere that they're exposing themselves in isn't necessarily the best for them to learn how to be that type of Joe Panik type player per se.
Yeah, because that stuff probably doesn't show up on your PG profile or your PBR profile or whatever. Like, they just want to hit the ball hard and get their knocks and like go home. Win or lose, like it's whatever.
Yes, and that's the thing, exactly. We're missing. I feel, and I'm very young with the scouting thing, but I feel that's one thing that's missing in this game right now is guys like that. And there are still guys like that. I know them. I could think of them, but it's not as much because it doesn't mean as much to kids anymore.
Yeah.
And that's upsetting.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you wonder if that was just it was only bred in like backyard baseball and sandlot baseball, and because kids have this competition in them from their buddies. Like I was writing a story recently about one of my childhood friends who moved away at 13, and we played like backyard baseball like every day until his dad got a better job in Tennessee and they left. But like I didn't want to lose to Kevin. Like it didn't matter. It was just me and him, but every day we wanted to outcompete each other. So there were like little things you could do, like whether it was just like focusing up or I don't know. But, and then I can't imagine like you think of the movie The Sandlot, like that kind of thing, like just every day competing with a bunch of kids, like your own game. And it just seems like it's tough to replace that probably now with the way baseball is organized.
Yes. I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's those days, and I can't speak for everyone, but those are few far in between. The days you're talking about with your childhood, trying to beat your friend, like it's not like that anymore. Like, if anything, what they're trying to do is beat their friends in a game of Fortnite.
Yeah.
But that's okay. It's it's society, and the thing, we have to adapt and get to learn that and try to show them what it is like to be like the Joe Panik or the Sandlot type mentality. We have to teach them that now. I mean, it's or expose them to it in a sense.
Yeah. And so I looked you up, obviously, and so you're listed, I think, officially at 5'8", 170. Is that your accurate playing weight? I think that was your height, but you're also going to fit in that same category, right? As a guy who kind of has to do a lot of intangible things to help his team win. So can you tell me about Ty as a player?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, 5'8", 170. I mean, I was more like 5'8", 160, 165. I mean, I probably threw on those bonus 5 pounds to make my bio look good.
You got to, yeah.
But for me, I mean, I was not the most talented guy. I didn't have the most raw powers. Like, the thing I thought I did was I competed better than guys, and I knew the game on a high level. I instinctually knew the game like pretty well, just from being around it, thinking it before I went to sleep, thinking of it when I woke up in the morning. That was the thing I had going for me. So I could be in a game, and I wasn't the most physically gifted, but my mind kind of kept me there. So one thing I learned about myself is I thought like a coach kind of. So it was my best tool and my worst tool at the same time. I could overthink things, and I could think ahead of things. So it wasn't until I got older, like to pro ball, where I was really able to control it, because my mind went too fast at times, if that makes sense. As far as my ability, I was, like I said, I wasn't the most gifted. I could defend pretty good, but it was all, I had to be locked in more than everybody else, basically. And I just what I learned is like I had to be better at what I could control more than anybody else. And I only knew talent was going to take me so far that it had to be that way. So, but I mean, I'm grateful for that, because I think those lessons help you out in life. You know, nothing ever really came that easy to me on this. But like, I didn't think that. I thought, you know, I just loved baseball. So that's what helped me get to all these different places and doing what I had to do. Like in hindsight, yeah, I was under talented. I had less tools than everybody else. But when I'm in the heat of it, I didn't really think about it like that.
How did that manifest itself when you said, you know, you could overthink things, get too far ahead? Like, what did that look like? Was it like a physical thing? Did you feel like you got a little bit too tense, or you would take yourself out of a bat because you're expecting a pitcher to do a certain thing, or you're expecting a certain situation, or expecting to be pitched a certain way? Tell me a little bit more about that.
So I think it derives from, so I know we're probably going to touch on this, but playing for my father, right? It was the best thing I ever did in my life, but a lot of times you're either, you know, I was a guy that had to compete for playing time. So my mind thought like a coach. The way I thought, if I was on the bench in the game, it thought like a coach, right? So I would think ahead of what I needed to do to play, or what did I need to do to help the team. And by doing so, I would get result-oriented. And by getting result-oriented, it's just, once you start being result-oriented, you just lose sight of the game in its roots, lose sight of what you can control. You start going after unattainable goals. You're trying to get hits instead of having good at bats. You know, you're a little bit. I was a little bit hard on myself in this capacity, and it was an immaturity thing, but it was also like a passion thing, because I wanted to do so well at times. It was never, well, this guy's going to throw me a slider here, and then next pitch he's going to. It wasn't necessarily that. It was more just me getting ahead of myself and like knowing what I had to do to be where I want to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think that's one thing that a lot of young players don't grasp. And when guys start, like, all right, the game's on the line, like, I know a base hit wins it or an out loses it. They try to get a base hit, and there's just a fundamental difference, like you said, between I'm just trying to see the pitch and get barrel to the ball. Like, that's a completely different task than I want to get a hit, which I was explaining to a 12-year-old last night. I'm like, what's the difference between a ball hit hard, you know, because his favorite player is Javi Baez. I'm like, if Javi Baez hits a ball, you know, hard into the hole to the left, is there a difference between the one that sneaks through between the third baseman and the shortstop, or the one that goes right to the shortstop and becomes a double play? Like, did he do any better on one than the other? And he's like, no, probably not. I'm like, yeah, like, that's just how baseball is. So when you get too wrapped up on what can I get a hit here, or what you can and can't control, it can just either derail you, like you said, or it can help you to just stay, I think, more relaxed under pressure. And I think with you playing for your dad, I'm sure there was a lot more of, you know, just some of those expectations. Because I know I experienced them as a player in a different way later on. But, you know, when you say, like, I have to be this to, like, earn my keep, to have other guys respect, or to have people not say this about me or that about me, I'm sure you went through a lot of that too, right? And that kind of, I'm sure, invades your mind when you're trying to have, you know, a productive, kind of clean at bat.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, you're making me smile. Think about, like, where I was at one point in my college career, is that mindset. And it could be a poisonous mindset at times, because when you're going good with that mindset, you feel, you know, you're a little too, like, high keel, you know. But if you're going bad, it hurts you, you know. Like, you're like, damn, you know, am I letting my dad down? What are these kids don't think I'm good? You know, those thoughts will come through your mind. So to back all this is, like, if your mind and what you want to accomplish isn't in the right place, and you're not focused on the right controllable aspects of the game's going to know. Because then you're doing it, you're losing sight of why you're doing it. And at that time, that little stint when I first started playing for my dad, I lost sight of why I was truly playing the game. And I wasn't playing for myself and for the love of the game. I was playing to appease people, try to make my dad happy. And that's not really, if you get into something like that, that's not, it's a really tough way to have fun and succeed.
And I can imagine that's just a unique, and I do want to, let's chat about that a little bit. So what were some of the, because there's lots of different perspectives and angles about you playing, for your father and him having a storied career there. And in a lot of ways, like being St. John's baseball. So when his son, who grew up there, grew up in the clubhouse, dragging his little bat around the field, when you were suddenly in uniform, how did you handle the expectations and the pressure, and how was your dad? How was he about it?
Oh, he was great on it, about it. He didn't treat me any differently. He was very stern and treated me equally. If anything, during practice, he'd get on me a little bit more, but he was awesome with it. When I first got to St. John's, my freshman fall, it was okay, but it's fall ball. Like, people don't understand, fall ball is a way different cry than when the lights turn on in the spring. It's not, you can't even compare the two. It doesn't matter. There's no replicating fall baseball to what happened in the spring. Point blank. There's nothing. You can't, even with these teams coming in and being able to play each other nowadays, like you get 2 scrimmages in the spring now from outside company. It's fall baseball is way different than the spring. So to fast forward to the spring, I wasn't ready for it. I started hot, and then once something didn't go my way my freshman year, I was, I kind of put some pressure on myself, and I wasn't able at 17, 18 years old. It was tough for me to truly handle that, but I learned from it. My freshman year was the only losing season my dad has ever had at St. John's. So, it in perspective at the time, I thought it was tough, but you look back and you kind of like laugh at it and realize, well, hey, that's, it's just a game. You can't have that type of perspective. But to go forward, it's one of those things that I wish I know what I know now type of thing and could do it all over again. That'd be great. But I wouldn't have learned what I know now, because that experience taught me too much if I were able, I had other options to go to other schools, but if I had explored that, I wouldn't have known, and my perspective would not be as clear and as sharp as it is now in a baseball capacity, because now I think I can relate to kids a little bit differently now, having this perspective on it. Yeah.
So was there ever any kind of griping from, other players or from other outside sources, like, oh, he's just starting because, of the name on the back of his jersey, or he doesn't deserve to be in the lineup, or he's just, getting special treatment? Did you have to deal with a lot of that?
Not particularly. I mean, the one thing I realized, to do all that with your teammates, you just have to try and be the best teammate you can be. And out of all of this, the one thing I learned is that's probably the most controllable aspect of it all, is just be the best teammate, whether you're playing or not, because then it all works out itself. And my freshman year, I probably wasn't the best teammate because I was into myself a little bit. If you're taking stuff like that, you're into yourself a little bit more. So I'm sure there was people who said this or that. I mean, that's the business of all this. People are always going to talk, but it's like, what do you want to focus your energy on that, or you want to focus your energy on being better and being a good teammate? And that's kind of the biggest thing I learned, is how to be a great teammate from that experience, because at the end of the day, that's what mattered the most.
Yeah. And I'm sure you, looking about all your vast experiences in that clubhouse, I'm sure you don't really think as much about like the big hits you had as much as you have like really fun memories of guys teaching you stuff when you were a kid, and then like just growing up watching your team win, and watching, I'm sure, your father excel, and see like experiencing that with him. And and just like the clubhouse camaraderie. I mean, for me, that's the stuff that I look back on. With every passing day, like the things I did on the field get a little foggier, but the memories of teammates and all that stay pretty clear.
Oh yeah, I mean that's what it's about. It's the memories of being on those long bus rides, the times in the locker room. Like that's what you like truly cherish. And it's funny, that's what I truly miss from playing. And being not that far removed, I don't know, 3 years now. That's the stuff you cannot replicate.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Yeah, you can't find a clubhouse too many places elsewhere in life. I think one of my buddies is a firefighter. That's probably a pretty decent spot to find it, but it's definitely something that you lose, and I think we all tend to miss that. So after college, you got drafted, and tell me about the transition into pro ball, because it's a different game, and then we'll kind of get back into amateur baseball after that, where we talk about your scouting. So again, like you've seen every aspect of the game. So what was it like going from I guess St. John's is, to me, they're like a little more than a mid-major. I mean, how would you qualify them? I mean, they're like a big, like well-known school, and they've been historically very good. Do you remember a kid named Jared Yecker?
Yeah, I know Yecker. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
Do you want to hear a good Jared Yecker story? This is like one of my favorite stories from all time. It was from summer baseball. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So when I was a sophomore in college, I was playing summer baseball for a team called the Silver Spring Tacoma Thunderbolts. This is in the Cal Ripken Senior Collegiate League, which is like a decent league centered around D.C. area. And Jared was a freshman. So he was younger and like huge. I mean, he's like 6'5" probably and like 240. He was like a really big kid, and he's like 90, 92, which back in 2006 was like really hard. Like you didn't have that many guys on a summer team that threw that hard, like consistently, like 90, 91, whatever. And so we're playing towards the end of the season, we're playing the Bethesda Big Train. This is like like the biggest team in the league. They get like 1,000 fans a game.
Yeah,
They're
I've
really
been to
good.
that stadium.
Yeah, Shirley Povich Field. So in the first inning, Jared's pitching, and guy hits. No, I'm sorry. We were up in the first inning, top of the first, and our third hitter. We go in order the first two batters, and then our third hitter hits a soft line drive to second base, and the second baseman catches it and like holds it for the crowd, because Bethesda had like clinched their division that day, so they had like a little pregame ceremony. So this guy just like catches it, kind of holds it for the crowd. The crowd loves it, and our manager was like an old school, like almost reached the majors with the Yankees. He is also a scout now, but like a really great hard-nosed kind of baseball guy. And so he looks in the dugout after we could come back in, and he goes, "I'm going to be really unhappy if that guy doesn't get hit by a pitch sometime today." And so the next inning, that kid comes up, and he makes the very unfortunate decision of squaring around to bunt. And so the first pitch just kind of whizzes up by his head. Nothing happens. He doesn't know what's happening. The second pitch, he squares around, and Jared absolutely just buries the ball right into his belly button. Just buries it into his stomach, like 92 right into the kid's stomach. And he just crumples into a heap, and down he goes. So he got up. He wasn't injured, but that was just a moment that I'll never forget, and probably maybe shouldn't. I don't know. It's old and done with, but it was a fair. I think the baseball gods thought it was fair. But I played with a couple St. John's guys. I know Jared was one of them. Bruce Kern was a teammate of mine over on the Long Island Ducks.
Oh yeah, he's still playing.
Yeah, he's in Taiwan still. But yeah, don't square around the butt if you're in trouble. If you're in trouble with the other team. But so anyway, tell me about the transition to pro ball.
Yeah, this is very how should I say it? This is a big part of like I kind of had an aha moment in all of this. So at the end of my senior year, I fractured my hamate. I thought it was over. Whatever. the draft comes and my dad's like, hey, just try to keep yourself in shape. You never know what happens. Somebody might give a guy like you a chance, whatever, as like an org guy, whatever. So the draft comes and we're down in South Jersey watching a high school game. My student hall prep where I went to high school was playing in the state championship. They had won it. We're watching another pitcher that's going to St. John's the next year pitch that day. But we're on the way home from that, and I get the phone call, hey, you ready? Do you want to play? I said, what do you think? I'm all fired up. I'm on the verge of tears. And sure enough, the Reds take me in the 36th round, and it's probably the best day of my life. It's your childhood dream comes to fruition, and it was special. So, they gave me a day, said, hey, your flight's this day. I get out there. That first process is really chaotic, and you don't know what to expect. They're doing physicals, they're doing this, they're doing that. And, your head's in a whirlwind, and then as a 36 rounder, you're not getting treated like, the first rounder per se, because those guys are invested a lot of money, and so they got to take care of those guys. So you're really trying to, find your way. But 2 days, we're at the mini camp, 2 days go by, and, finally get to play. And, I'm in this group of hitters. These guys are hitting balls 500 feet. Like, it seems that way. And I'm coming off an injury. I'm hitting the ball, spraying line drives around. I'm with rehab, like, AAA, AA guys, Latin players that are blasting balls. So that moment in there, I knew, like, right then and there, it's like, I cannot swing like that. Like, if I try to swing for the fences like that, I'll make a fool out of myself. So I gotta be better at hitting line drives all over the field than everybody else. But it took me till that right then to realize, that's the type of player I need to be, because I don't compare to that. So that day we're playing, we're doing all that, we're taking IO, and I'm like kind of upset, like, because the thing I call my dad the next morning. I'm like, Dad, these guys, they're faster than me, they're better than me, they're like, what am I doing? Like, there was a big sense of doubt. And he said, hang in there, bud. There's a room for baseball players. Just hang in there and just watch. Sure enough, I hung in there, and that right then and there taught me that there's room for everybody. Just because somebody could do a raw task better doesn't mean they're any better than the player next to them. So what I learned right then – go ahead.
No, I was just saying I think that's a big lesson that a lot of kids don't get a chance to – or they don't have that aha moment like you did.
Yeah. So what it was is then I learned from all this that there's so much in this game that's going to be out of my control. So how can I be better than everyone else being good at what's in my control? And what was in my control was, my routine, being a good teammate, walking to the plate with confidence, having a plan, swinging at a quality pitch, taking a quality swing at a quality pitch, and putting barrel on the ball. Outside of everything else, I couldn't really. That's all not out of my control. So I developed that kind of mantra, and it paid off for me because the coaches respected it, and it was just one of those things that the pro game is, the tools are a lot different than the college game. Not necessarily the play is a lot better at the early level, but the tools are louder. From that experience, I learned that, you can make up for all this by, being better at the little things than everybody else. And it was that aha moment for Ty Blancmeyer to realize all this. And the other thing is, being around the coaches are, a lot of times ex-big leaguers and stuff. So what you realize there is they're very experience rich. So, you pick up on little things, and from coaching to college and coaching in professional level, you get, in college a lot of times you can get a magnitude of ways, and pro balls you have, how should I say, like a slimmer way to do one thing. So they think, it's not necessarily that they think their way is the highway, but they've done it, so they have a pretty good idea of how it's done. I think that's had to do with a lot of my transition to pro ball. But the one thing I tell you is these kids is like, just because somebody can hit the ball farther than you, hit it, throw harder than you, like there's ways to be able to make that up for yourself. And, you have to know who you are, and that's what I learned, and really rely on that and fall back on your process compared to everything else. And the other thing that was different from me transitioning, I didn't play for my dad anymore. So every day we'd talk on the phone, and his insights were great. The pressure for me was less in pro ball than it was in college, just because it wasn't my father. My dad wasn't at the helm anymore. It was the Cincinnati Reds, and everybody was having the common goal of trying to get to the big leagues. So it was about developing and winning games for the Billings Mustangs at the time.
Gotcha.
So for me, the pressure backed off significantly in professional baseball. And the thing about that, it's all perspective. But that my perspective had changed. Maybe I saw it a little bit clearer at the time.
Your story about not trying to do what all those other guys with, tons and tons of power, it reminds me of running. I was recounting, the story of when I was a freshman. I remember the first day of conditioning, like, coaches run you to see, who did the work and who's in shape and all that stuff. And my dad is a runner. And when I was growing up, anytime we would run, I never loved running. I also had asthma as a kid, so it was would kill me. But when I would run, one of the things he would always impart on me was to pace yourself, which is a really hard thing to learn, especially when you're running against other people. So obviously, starting this run, the whole team, all 25 or 30 of us are on this line. Our coach is, he's got his hand up in the air. He's ready to blow the whistle. If we don't, finish in a good time, he's going to think we're lazy and we're off to a bad start for the year. And so all of us are like on this line. We're tense. We're ready and nervous. And everyone just wants to sprint off. And I wanted to sprint off. And then I remembered, I'm like, no, this is a longer race than that. You can't just run your hardest in the first 100 meters like a lot of these guys are going to, because what's going to happen? They're going to peel off, they're going to start fading, and they're going to end up going slower than if they pace themselves from the beginning. And so I learned over time, I don't have to be the fastest one off the block. I can just start running my race from the beginning. And that, to me, it just reminds me a lot of what you said. You weren't going to let those guys change what you knew you could do, and you saw firsthand that you were going to run your own race and not take off and try to do what they were doing, because that's not necessarily good for you.
Yeah, and that's a great point right there. And that's what it's all about, though. You knowing yourself, and that analogy it's gold. It really is gold. So I mean,
I pulled it from my gold. I have a couple piles here on my desk. That was from the gold pile. So
Yeah.
Nothing but the best.
Yeah. The last thing I'd say is I go to pro ball, and my roommate is none other than Nick Senzel. So I wanted to say to him, dude, you got the right room. They just took you in the second pick overall, and I'm the 36th rounder. They're putting me and you together. But I mean, he ended up being a great kid and teaching me a lot about the game, and talk about having a good perspective. This kid just got paid a lot of money to play baseball, but he didn't see it like that. So I mean, I just from being around him for a month before he moved to A ball was a cool experience as well.
So once you're done with your pro career, tell me about the transition out, because that's hard for everyone. Because you grew up, like I said, in a clubhouse. Baseball was everything, and then suddenly it was over. So was scouting always a thing that was in your mind? What were your options? What did you feel like was next for you when you're sort of out there on that raft, trying to find your new direction?
Yeah, scouting was something I had always thought about, but I never immersed myself in the thought of it. So when I got released, they basically said to me, he's like, hey, Ty, the Reds said, I want to keep you around. We like you. Everybody in the org, you have a good relationship with people, So basically when I got released, they retained me, and I was essentially a coach in the AZL. I was coaching rookie ball. I was coaching kids that I was at extended spring training with, essentially, as well as the new draft kids. And I did that for about 2 months, and that's not something I really wanted to do because I wanted to play baseball, like that's one thing I wanted to do. But my dad said, "Hey, Ty, where do you think you're going with this?" I said, "Dad, I mean, I love this. I love playing. This is what it's about." He said, "Yeah, but at the time they weren't, to be a big leaguer as an infielder, you need to be invested in, and not necessarily money, but at bats." And he didn't feel like I was getting that investment. So he's like, "Why don't you do this? Trust me on this, buddy." So I took the opportunity. Instead of going home that summer, I was in Arizona in the heat working with the Arizona Reds. And, that was a unique experience because the head coach was Jose Nieves. The hitting coach was Lenny Harris. And I was just another coach on the staff just trying to learn from them. And they gave me some wiggle room to kind of pick up on stuff and teach and learn. And not to mention the coordinators that would come in, like Miguel Cairo and Barry Larkin. And I was able to learn from them. So that summer, it was hard to do because my heart was still in playing the game, but it made a lot of sense now looking back from the knowledge I gained. So to fast forward those 2 summers, that's what I did right after I played. I get a call in August, and the Brewers called me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in scouting?" I said, "Yeah, da-da-da." So long story short, I interviewed, and, the interview was not difficult for me because I was just talking baseball the whole time, kind of like me and you are talking baseball right now. So I wasn't like really nervous. I was 23 years old, 24, whatever it was at the time. And I've been talking baseball with my dad since I was 10 years old on car rides home from game. So it was easy for me to kind of do that. I guess they were enamored enough for me to give a young guy a shot. It was unique, to say the least, to get going. And like we mentioned, Zach Clark was the kind of the first kind of guy to kind of talk to me about it all, and through his experience to kind of take me under his wing in it per se. So that's kind of how I got into it. I mean, I had no scouting experience other than being around the game and going to recruiting events with my dad, which actually probably is the most tangible scouting experience you could possibly have. But that's kind of how I segued into all of this.
So you're scouting amateurs now, and you have New Jersey all the way up to Maine, correct?
Yep.
So is there I'm sure it's one of those jobs where they expect you come in with a lot of knowledge of the game and a lot of, as a player, you can evaluate talent like we do it every day, whether you're playing or coaching or watching. But what's the big takeaways from your first year scouting? Because I know in conversations with Zach, like he was just learning so much, and I know you guys, I'm sure, were bouncing tons of stuff off each other, but it just seems like it's probably hard to know what your club expects of you, number one. And then I think probably today, more than any day in history, it's probably harder to be a scout because there's so much data, there's so many new ideas about analytics, every team's using them in a different way. And we won't really get into what the Brewers are necessarily looking for, but how do you navigate writing a report that's, kind of based on feel and like your impressions? Because like you said, Joe Panik, there's things you want to put on paper with a guy like him or with a guy like you. Like, this guy is a ball player. He can help you win games. He can do intangible things that don't necessarily show up on TrackMan, right? But there's still value in that, I would assume. So tell me about like what your process has become now as an amateur scout.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, like, as you were mentioning, the first time I got into it, the thing I learned was, like, these guys travel a lot. But that was from being at St. John's and looking at working alongside the same scouts now, like that kind of perspective change for me was I didn't realize I had an idea of what they did, but the depth of what they were doing, they were always kind of place to place, seeing stuff like that. As far as my process, everyone's is different. For me, I try to never forget how hard this game is, because I think a lot of times as scouts, the easy thing to do is like, this guy is not very good. He's not going to have what it takes to play in the big leagues. And the odds are, if we take that mentality, we're going to be right more than we're wrong. The one thing I try to do is challenge myself is like, what do I see in this guy? Why do I like him? Kind of think of it that way. Just because, to get to the big leagues is hard enough. Yes, I'm still very stern with the player and what I see, but I try not to cross him off right away just based on, the odds. The one thing I learned is being around the game is like, you never know who could pitch in the big leagues. Zach Clark, point A, Zach Clark was probably tougher than everybody else. I never saw Zach Clark pitch, but to be a major leaguer like that, you have to have a high level of belief in yourself. And a lot of times, if we don't know these kids, we won't know that. And I think there's so much good information out there on, TrackMan. All this stuff is great because we're able to get the pitch types and tools and makeup of stuff from a raw standpoint. We're able to get the accuracy of that better. But what we aren't able to get is, unless as scouts, and this is one thing this is the most passionate part of my job, is to get to know the kid, get to see their fibers, get into their fibers, because that's what makes a difference. And I keep going back to Zach Clark because I talk about his story all the time. That story is incredible to me, because what I learned is if you come across a kid like that, that's a kid you want to give a shot. If the ability's there, because at some point the abilities are all going to be somewhat in the same pool. So what separates everybody else is their belief in themselves, their fortitude, their willingness to get better, their love for the game. That love for the game is going to take any given person higher than everybody else. So for me as a scout, those are some things I'm still looking at. And one thing that it makes sense to me now, a lot of times, and you could speak to this, is a lot of times coaches will be, or scouts will be, hey, it's about being is this kid a good kid? It sees that. When people ask that to you, and you're on that amateur side and you're playing, you necessarily don't really understand that. And now I understand it more, because being a good person, treating people right in this game, that's another way to separate yourself. Nobody, those 1% or 0.1% of guys like Mike Trout that are just way more talented than everybody else. But Mike Trout's also a good person, so he's not a good example. But what I'm saying is talent can only take everybody so far. So you have that peak of people that are like Mike Trout, that's a great person and a great talent. That takes you so far. But for everybody else, there has to be a high level of being a good character person. And there are guys that aren't, but it's the character morality argument. Just because you're a moral person doesn't mean you're going to be a Major League Baseball player. But that high character person, that makes a difference to me. And that's what I look for. That's why I try to talk to these kids and get to know them, even if it's 20 minutes in a meeting. Anything I can get out of them, just so they can learn. I can learn from them their love for the game. Because I really believe that's what separates people. Above all else, that is what separates people.
Well, and it ends up being the reason that you're willing to suffer when things get hard too. When you're in a huge slump and you feel tons of pressure and you just don't know how to get out of it and you want to quit, because we all have those. I know I have those. It's that no, I can't just give up on this that easy. This is bigger than that. This was so much of my life. I'm doing and it's got to be for you, not for someone else. You weren't playing for, because your T-ball coaches will be disappointed if you quit or whatever. There's so many external factors that people carry with them. But I know for me, I always played for myself. And it sounds like you always played because you loved it, not because anyone else wanted you to, even though you grew up with a really great, baseball father figure. It doesn't sound like you were forced into it at all. It was just both in both of your DNA. And so that carries you through those hard times and gives you it forces you to dig deeper rather than look for ways out. You look for solutions rather than look for ways out. And for those of you listening who maybe haven't caught up on the podcast as much, Zach Clark was on the show twice. He and I were teammates. He is about the same size, I think technically maybe a quarter inch shorter than I am on paper, but pretty ordinary size right-hander, senior sign, got $1,000, made it to the major leagues. After briefly making it to the major leagues, was asked to convert into a knuckleballer, and he said, All right, let's do it. And took a really interesting turn for the remaining years of his career. But like a guy who's just extremely well liked, a great clubhouse guy, someone who, as a young player, like he's someone you want to emulate, someone who got more out of his career because he was such a good teammate, such a good, respectable, like professional. So I'll put links in the description here on YouTube or in podcast land. I'll put those in there. So if you want to click through and listen to his one of his past episodes where I share his story or he shares his story, I'll definitely put that in there for you so you have a little more context. But so it sounds like you dig deeper looking for the intangible stuff that ultimately when, and it seems like full well that there's a funnel, and when all guys become relatively equal physically, you want to say as a scout that you found some guys that you knew were going to put in maybe that extra work or grit through tough times and like find ways to make it.
Yes, and with that being said, I mean, there's still a level of talent they need to have, but like I said, there comes a point, and that talent isn't everything when everybody's talented, if that makes sense. So there comes a point where, you talk to these big leaguers, like they're mentally stronger in their abilities than most people. For whatever reason, everybody gets there differently, but that's the common theme I do notice.
So for young kids listening and parents and coaches, I mean, you've been through the game in so many different angles. You've played, you've coached, you've scouted. Give some parents and players a couple actionable things that they might do now that you're a scout. There's hey Ty, here I am. What universal tips would you give a couple players or parents to help them along their journey and maybe give themselves a little bit better chance to make it to the next level, whether that's college or professional baseball? The
biggest thing I'd say is to do it for the love of what you're doing and know why you're doing what you're doing. To go back, this is a game. I mean, 0 for 4, 4 for 4. I think the big thing is, like, sometimes if, kids aren't succeeding and whatever, I think a lot of times we have to change the meaning of success for baseball. And I think a lot of times we don't know the meaning of success, because we're looking to get 3 hits. We're trying to get 3 hits in 1 at bat. And I think to make success more attainable for these kids will make the game more fun. So I think to be mindful of where the kid is at and their abilities is another big thing. To be able to be honest with themselves and what they need to get better at, in the sense of, little Johnny's weak right now, but if he focuses on the right things, the right techniques, he'll be fine. So I think with all of this progression of baseball, I think success needs to be treated like a development tool. How's that? A development in the game. Like, car rides home shouldn't be bad with their parents. It should be always, why did I have so much fun today? And it goes back to the club baseball thing is, these kids play so much that, it's and the competing is less, that it all dwells back on themselves because the win or loss doesn't necessarily matter.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it's a cultural kind of situation nowadays where I don't think anyone knows what they're looking to accomplish sometimes on the field. Like, were we just trying to get better? Were we trying to win? Are we trying to win, but this game didn't matter? Like, what games do matter? Do tournaments, like, it's hard to know as a coach. Like, I did this last year. It's like, do I need to care about winning here? Or can I care about getting kids reps or, like, putting them in situations that help them develop? It's sometimes ambiguous. So I think that's an important distinction for parents to understand, that on the car ride home, it needs to be a focus on, just caring about your son and reminding them that it's supposed to be fun and they should have enjoyed their day at the ballpark or at practice or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what it's about. At the end of all of this, I mean, these kids won't remember their 3 for 3s in 5 years, but they'll remember the fun they had, and there should be a fun initiative to amateur baseball.
Yeah, and I think if there's anything I've kind of taken away from you today, it's that, like, you really love the game, and it seems like you've grown up in it, and you've always enjoyed yourself doing it, and that seems to be like an overwhelming, obvious thing just in the way you talk about baseball, even from all your different perspectives on it. Baseball was and is and will continue to be a fun thing that you just got out of bed to do, whether it's scouting or coaching or playing.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. It's all about the people, and that's the cool thing about baseball. You know, it's people, they make the game. The game is something that we all have in common. It's a special bond because the game it's such a special game. You know, can't run the clock out. You know, there's, like they say, there's beauty in baseball, and that's, you know, there's no truer thing than that. In a biased way, but there is beauty in baseball.
So Ty, how can listeners follow up with you? You Twitter, any other social media that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Ty Blank0. Shoot me a follow. Get slide in the DMs, whatever it might be. And I'm also on Twitter. I think it's Tay Blanks1 on Twitter and Ty Blank0 on Instagram. Yeah, and that's what I got. That's probably the best way to reach out to me.
Okay, awesome. And I'll put links on that on the screen here on YouTube, and I will also put links in both the show descriptions. So if you're interested in following Ty, follow up with him and kind of be part of his journey through scouting and message you out there. So Ty, thanks for being on the show. I thought you had a lot of really good wisdom to share. I mean, especially from guys who aren't the most physically talented, and I'm also one of those people. You learn more from them because they had to internalize their game. They had to find ways to get better. They had to find ways to win and to maximize their ability. So I was pretty certain I was going to get a bunch of that from you today, and we definitely did, because I think for a lot of the smaller players out there, or for guys that haven't, or maybe are late bloomers, I think there's a lot they can take from you and your story, and some of the tips that you gave and some of the stories that you shared, just in how you became the best version of you and tried not to let external factors change you along the way.
No, I appreciate that, but I mean, the bottom line is anything you do in life, and especially this game, because the baseball gods know you do it for the love of it. That's, at the end of the day, that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it enjoyable, is doing it because you love it. And that's what it's about. Do it for the love.
All right. Well, Ty, thanks again, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
All right, so that wraps it up for this week. I want to thank again my guest, Ty Blancmeyer. Really awesome talk. There's tons of stuff to take away from that, especially the lessons learned as a guy who wasn't the most physically gifted on the field. Ty's not a huge guy. He's more of a second baseman type, and he learned full well that he had to stay within himself to be successful. And I think that message really shone through in our talk today. So just a reminder, this show and everything else grows through sharing, through hitting the like button, through leaving a review. So if you feel compelled today to do any of those things, I'd greatly appreciate it. Any links, so to the other podcasts we alluded to today, as well as my book, some of my free resources, my email newsletter, all those links can be found in the description, both in podcast land and on YouTube. Thanks again, and we'll see you here next week on Dear Baseball Gods.